Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. As mentioned, I'm an ethnographer, sociologist, turned user researcher. I think about human problems in a lot of different ways. I've also been an advice columnist twice. So I think about human problems and the ways they manifest, but also the places they take root, both in our individual interactions and our larger patterns. So it's really fascinating to hear all of these talks and to think about all of the different ways we can identify and solve problems. But today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I like to call human infrastructure. And because I'm a sociologist, I'm going to start out telling you a little bit about a man named Max Weber and his famous essay, Bureaucracy. And I promise this is not a boring talk, so please don't leave, even though it's about bureaucracy. In Bureaucracy, Max Weber detailed what he considered to be the ideal typical forms of administration. Among those characteristics, an ideal bureaucracy would have formal hierarchy, clear division of labor, trained subject matter experts, all sorts of things that we kind of identify with what we see in a bureaucracy, but actually a functional one. And he didn't say that it was the greatest form, but he thought it was a pretty efficient way that you could organize a system, a company, whatever it was that you were trying to organize. And if you've never spent time with his essay, or you've never really read it or considered it, you're probably like, oh, you gotta be kidding me, bureaucracy and efficiency in the same sentence. Not actually possible. But what he imagined as a bureaucracy kind of was at the time. But first, let's think about how bureaucracy is defined. Bureaucracy is defined, as you can see by the second one, as an excessively complicated administrative procedure. And as you can see, the first definition is a system of government in which most of the important decisions are taken by state officials rather than elected representatives, which, if you squint, looks a lot like excessively complicated administrative procedure. But once upon a time, bureaucracy had the potential to be an efficient system of organizing. But then systems and organizations, what? Take my earring out. Oh, thanks, Layla. Apparently my earring is making noise. Sorry. So systems got complicated and humans got involved. And what happens when humans get involved in ideal systems? Things get messy. That's what we do, right? We make things complicated. So why am I talking to you about bureaucracy at a UX conference? Because I think of bureaucracy as something I like to call human infrastructure. Think of regular old infrastructure in society. Think about all of the things that we need to make society run. Waste management, roads, social services, financial systems, communication systems. We need at least some of those systems to help our society run on any level. And an organization, a company you work in, is kind of like a mini society, right? We have similar needs inside our companies. Online communities are kind of similar. They're just not physical. They don't need buildings like this one where we can all sit and look at each other and talk. And the digital landscapes that we've spent the past few decades building in what was once the wild, wild web, technically they need these structures, and we've built them, but have we been as thoughtful about them as we could be? Because we don't think about human infrastructure in the same way that we do digital. Just like with bureaucracy, we design products and systems, we plunk them down, and then we kind of walk away. We expect humans are just going to figure them out. What happens? Humans get involved, things get complicated, and maybe the technology is used in ways we never expected people would use it. Maybe other technologies come in. Maybe they offer new levels of complexity. Or maybe our products and our systems obscure the human structures we are hoping they will help. So I imagine many of you are familiar, at least, with the concept of loose coupling. We have it in computer systems, we have it in coding and programming, but you can also consider the concept of loose coupling in terms of organizations. So there was an organization theorist named Carl Weick, and he wrote a paper called Educational Organizations as Loosely Coupled Systems. And he argued that, contrary to popular belief, an organization doesn't accomplish what it gets done based purely on its rational plans and its procedures and its hierarchical structures. That system needs to be loosely coupled to the people who actually make things happen, the people in the system. If there is no wiggle room, if there is no way for people to really exist in reality and not just enact those intense pre-planned systems, the system dies. He explored this in the context of a school system. On one side, he's got structure, so you've got budgets and administrators and the way things are supposed to be set up. And in theory, that should be reflected in the teachers and the way they do things and how everything happens. But you know this isn't how life works. If you've ever been on a school field trip, imagine an administrator planning a school field trip, and now imagine your actual school field trip, right? If we did things only as they were planned, if we stuck strictly to the schedule and we all behaved in exactly the way the administrator would plan, no one would ever get on a field trip that got out of the parking lot. So I live for a fun fact, I love a fun fact. And one fun fact about organizations and societies in general is they have what are called shadow structures. And a shadow structure is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's a hidden organizational structure that is kind of a truer representation of how an organization functions, where there are secret pockets of power, as well as disempowerment and subjugation. Think about like an old school 1980s company, very hierarchical, CEO. You can see, like, if you look at an external org chart or sort of the way that the company is presented to an external person, you can imagine power sits at the top and it slowly cascades downward, and at the bottom there's no power. But think about how a lot of those systems, those companies actually function, right? Think about an administrative and executive assistant who is the gatekeeper to the CEO. Think about who that person likes, who that person doesn't like, who they allow access to, and who they don't. That's a shadow system, and those play out in a lot of different ways. Here is my theory. All organizations have shadow structures, but the organizations that acknowledge the value of and the need for hidden structures are the ones we should strive to create. Systems that are too tightly coupled aren't healthy, but systems that are too loosely coupled also can't function in the long term, and worse, they're bad for us. This is where you come in, my lovely UX compatriots. You know how to design. You know how to understand the ways people really function in societies and organizations. You know how to step outside of your own ways of operating and understand how different systems and behaviors actually function in the real world. Best of all, I am willing to bet that almost all of you in this room know how it feels to have your work be ignored, not get taken seriously, and not be valued. We, this mighty crew of UX designers, researchers, people who really care about design and the way things function, we need to start thinking about human infrastructure. We need to start designing it as thoughtfully as we do all the cool products we hope will help people be more efficient and lead happier lives. And if you don't believe me on this, think about how weird it is that even as we've created all these products over the years, products to help you share photos and thoughts, to stay connected to friends and family, to do work and keep yourself more organized and more efficient than ever before, we keep finding new problems caused by our solutions. We keep reading more articles about how we're more exhausted, more overwhelmed, more alienated, more stressed out. Why? It's because a lot of what we design, despite our best efforts, is dehumanized. It takes the human out of the picture. It doesn't consider the human in the long run. I don't mean we intentionally dehumanize our users in that sort of we don't consider them as people way, more that we like to think we're clever enough to create technology that makes human work unnecessary. Sometimes we are, on occasion, but more often we're not. We still need human systems. Actual human systems with human connection. Those systems require a lot of work, and not just work up front. Part of the fun of designing a product is you can do all the work up front and then ship it. And then you have to do maintenance, you have to update it. But human systems, like all human relationships, require constant work. We're constantly renegotiating as humans in society. Relationships fail if you don't put work and effort into them. Sometimes they fail anyway. But consistent and thoughtful work is what helps them flourish. And we design products that don't take that into account. Let's look at some examples. How many tools do you use at work to communicate about work? Email, Slack, Workplace, Google Docs, Trello, Asana, Confluence, a wiki, Dropbox, Box, GChat, text, WhatsApp? All of them at once? Maybe. Maybe you don't think a document is a form of communication, but there you'd be wrong. And anyway, people often leave comments in a Google Doc, and you're kind of wondering, where did I see that? Was it in a comment? Where do I search for it, right? How easy is it to find what you need? Pretty hard, because not only are there things in all of these places, there are different spaces within those tools, and there are all these different people who are doing the work of kind of organizing them on their own, but not in a consistent, cohesive, planned, thought-out way that actually works for the majority of the people who are using them. Everyone, you've all had this problem where you're like, where is that one document, and it was left in the Google Drive of someone who left the company, but you can't find it. This happens all the time. Is it still going? This one doesn't work. Sorry, this is a lovely design slide, but apparently I have to wait till the animation ends. Do you feel stressed out? I feel very stressed out doing this. I feel very stressed out talking about this. This is how I feel at work. Stressed out. Okay, I know people hate email. I know no one wants to work where everyone has to use only one tool, especially people who have to work with vendors, outside people. They want to just use email, but internal people want to use Slack. You want to use this. We want to use Workplace because we have documents. We need Quip. We need this. We need that. People find a way to communicate in the way that works best for them. That is so great, but we are not just individuals. We have to function as a whole sometimes. We have to function as larger units, and those larger units need to have some kind of system that allows everybody to operate within them and get work done to the best of our abilities. And I live in Sweden, so I understand a lot right now about let's make everything equal, and sometimes people think let's make things shitty for everyone, and then it's equal. And I'm not saying let's make things shitty for everyone and then it's equal. I'm saying let's think of better systems that take all of these tools and make better use of them for all of us. Because no one wants to be tightly coupled to email. I mean, no one. But is it better to be so loosely coupled to our needs as organizations, as societies, as communities, that we're basically untethered? I don't think so. The problem is not that we don't have the right tool. We have so many great tools, and those tools get more powerful every single day. The problem, as I see it, is that we don't think enough about the complementary human systems that have to keep those tools running. It's like going somewhere that paved roads and installed a government and some institutions like 50 years ago and then never kept up with them and just let them run to ruin. And we have all been in places like that. Some of us have lived in places like that, right? Infrastructure needs constant work. And we have to think about how we do that work on the human level as well. Think of it like this. Imagine you run a company that is 1,000 people strong. You tell your entire company, we're moving into a new high-rise. You are on floors 2, 14, 33, 47 through 50. You open the doors and you say, good luck. Just organize yourselves, figure it out. By the way, everyone needs to get access to all of your work, so you need to make it publicly accessible. Have a good time, right? I mean, work would get done. We would figure it out. We are smart, industrious humans. But it would be inefficient. It would be unorganized. It would be, some people would love it. A lot of people would hate it. A lot of people wouldn't know where to go. They wouldn't know who to ask, who to talk to. And that's kind of like what digital products feel today, at least to all of the people I have talked to. And I've talked to a lot of people. That's my job. It's fascinating to me that in an industry with a variety of well-known processes devoted to planning projects and understanding dependencies and product development doesn't think to apply this method to the ways in which work and communication gets done inside organizations. The whole point of having stand-ups is to communicate, to understand who's working on what, whether there are blockers and redundancies. That is called communication. We do it all the time. Actual talking. Sometimes people do it in Slack. That's fine, still kind of talking. What's vital for humans in terms of sharing information and in terms of building trust is communication. And I don't think tools alone help us build trust. We have to do that together. I saw this a lot when I was at Slack. People would ask me, why does Slack work really well if you're a team of 20 or 30 or even 50, but once you're above 100, once you're above 250, once you get bigger and bigger and bigger, it just feels overwhelming. I feel stressed out. I don't know where to manage things. I don't know how to find things or what to do. I don't feel like I can stay on top of everything. It's a little bit like Dunbar's number. If you're not familiar with Dunbar's number, roughly speaking, it's about the number of people you can successfully maintain stable functioning relationships with without going into cognitive overload, right? Well, it's also about weak ties. We will not go into that here. So I want to focus on those stable relationships. There is a limit to how much any one person can know about the other people in their company and the work that they're doing. That's why startups are nimble. That's why small functional teams exist in large companies, because you can work more quickly, you can develop trust, you know who's doing what, you know where your dependencies are. The bigger it gets, the larger it gets, the more complicated, you don't know where to find information, you don't know who to ask, you don't know what to look for. And it's really frustrating. And not only that, all that information has been unleashed on your brain, and it's being organized by everyone else constantly. No wonder you're stressed out when you look at things like all of the tools that we've built. You don't have the tools to say, here is my inbox, here is my stuff, I know how I've organized it, because now your inbox is being organized by everyone else. That's really overwhelming. Technology, it's a tool. It's a tool that can help us, and it's a tool that can help us connect to each other and the right people, the right information, learn to trust. But only if we develop human systems along technological ones. This is an example that totally not in the realm of work products, but a fun fact, let's see, love a fun fact, that I read about a while ago is that women in general, use tracking apps, right? And they're great, they're very helpful. What's really interesting is that a lot of women have come to trust those apps with their very personal data more than they trust doctors. They don't feel comfortable talking to doctors. They don't feel like doctors listen to them. They don't trust doctors. And yet, like, people will just put in all kinds of personal medical information into an app, and they don't even know what they don't know where that data goes. And why? Because we don't think about human systems. We don't think about how we can better affect the ways in which people learn to communicate and trust one another. At your company, especially if you work for a big one, whose job it is to manage tools like Slack, Google Docs, Workplace, to help you find things and to help you know what should channels be called, where should we put these things, where are we going, and not just like, where is it, but where should it go in the future? How do we keep these systems constantly regenerating themselves? I don't know about you, it sounds like a dream to me. I mean, even at Slack, we had this, but it was still a work in progress, right? People would, working at Slack and then coming outside and working at a company that uses Slack, it's fascinating to see all the best practices we hoped people would use. They don't even know how the features exist, because that's what happens when you send a product out into the world. People are like, I don't know that's a feature, let alone a best product, if we don't help them as technologists, as designers, as researchers, develop those systems alongside the tools that they use. So before we can achieve that dream, we have another stumbling block, and it's a big one. It's something we need to overcome in ourselves, so a moment of tough love and therapy is about to happen. For example, we need to stop affording special status to certain roles and letting them do whatever they want, because that's how they work, and they're the most valued members of the company. Part of being on a successful team is doing what works best for the team, not just for you, not just for that one person who sort of a rogue, they do whatever they want, they really deliver. That's not how systems work, right? If some people want to use a tool because it helps them work better, but that tool disconnects them from the team and doesn't allow that work to be shared, we need to rethink that. We need to understand, how do we develop rules as a community that help us govern ourselves and help us behave in ways that we can produce for ourselves and for the people we want to help. The biggest thing I think we have to get over is our hubris and our self-aggrandizement, which is that we can build tools that solve all the human problems without involving the humans. We have to start valuing the people who do the work of keeping our teams and our organizations and our communities running. Just because people who do the jobs that allow our organizational infrastructures to function don't make anything doesn't mean they're not valuable. And this is the heart of my talk. This is really where it matters to me. I am talking about support people. I am talking about admins, executive assistants, project managers, IT admins, coordinators, office managers, operations folks, and more. I'm talking about people who do the job of keeping us running, taking out our literal and figurative garbage, and who make sure we know how to find the information and people we need to be successful at our jobs. When those people come to us and want help with processes that help us run, we need to not get annoyed or act like they're wasting our time. And we also need to help build tools that work for them, not just for us, not just for designers, not just for engineers, not just for the way that we work. About a decade ago, I sat next to a woman who she was an office manager of a high-rise building. And I asked her about her job, and she told me about it, looking at me a little funny. And I said, "Your job is fascinating." She looked at me and she says, "No one has ever said that to me. No one's ever told me my work. No one actually even wants to hear about my job. Imagine that's your life. Imagine everyone thinks that the work you do is boring, not worth listening to, not valuable, because all you do is literally keep an entire building full of people and businesses and their needs running successfully. You are able to grapple that level of complexity, or any level of complexity. Imagine how you would feel about your work if everyone just thought you were boring and menial and purposeless. It would feel really shitty. I mean, I've had that experience. Nobody cares about what you do, and you're just like, well, why should I try? Why should I do a good job? They also get paid less than people in other roles. That also feels bad. That job is necessary. That job is important. That job keeps us functioning, and we need to value it. The people who make up our infrastructure are really important, but like many infrastructures, we take them for granted until they fall apart. So let me switch gears slightly, because I want to talk about some examples that I think exemplify this, not necessarily at work, but in the world more broadly. Does anyone here ever use Flickr? No. Does it really? No, am I like the, okay, good, thank you. Nice, I love this corner right now. So Flickr, I've been on the internet a very long time. I won't say how long, but a long time. All right, I'll say how long. My first email address I got in 1992 when I was in online communities, like V-Rave. I used to telnet into chat rooms in 1992 and use BBSs, and I was like very, very early online community person. And Flickr, to me, was one of the best, if not the best, online community I've ever been a part of, maybe ever will be a part of. And I think, and this was before Yahoo, I mean, even before Yahoo ruined it. Part of the reason I think that Flickr was such a powerful community, there's two reasons, I think. One, they were really great about letting users control their privacy, right? Which, yeah, LiveJournal did too. I know other places did this as well. But the tools to control who saw what and who could comment, who could engage with you, were in your hands as a user. You got to do that. And it wasn't confusing, it wasn't scary, it wasn't overwhelming, it wasn't like wading through modern social media. For example, on Instagram, I had to turn off all notifications, including direct messages, because every time I go into Instagram and I try and reset no, 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 if I go out of that screen and go back in, they're all switched back to yes, every single time. That makes me not want to use a product. So privacy settings, really important. But more than that, Flickr took community super seriously, really seriously. They had rules. A lot of those rules were very clearly explained. They were discussed in the community settings. When I mean community managers, I mean literally the community partook in helping understand what these decisions were, what these rules were. There was transparency. You knew who the community moderators were. You valued them. They had visibility, right? These customer care agents and community managers were in charge of making sure that that organization, that community stayed healthy. And it was up to them to determine what kinds of content was permissible or inappropriate. It was challenged, it was up for debate. Sometimes people were angry, sometimes people were frustrated, but that is the problem with creating rules. They don't work for everybody, but sometimes they work best for the whole. Imagine community being valued at this level. Imagine community managers being valued at this level. Imagine anyone who doesn't make something. Imagine this level of transparency at Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Just kidding, you can't, because that's not how it works. So let's do a little comparison. Like I said, Instagram's privacy settings, Instagram's notification settings, Twitter, privacy, Facebook, privacy. Do you feel like you have control? Do you feel like you can navigate all of the privacy and data settings really successfully? Snap, no problem, not stressful, not confusing? No. Do you know where your data goes at night? No. Do you know how to control who sees what and who has access to you in a way that doesn't feel like a pain in the ass? Maybe you do. If you do, maybe come teach me, because I don't know, and I work in the industry, and I think I'm pretty smart. Do you know why you never see things like dick pics and beheadings on YouTube or on Facebook? Well, that's because there are people whose job it is literally to sit in an office building and look at all of the horrible stuff humanity has to offer and do what is called content moderation. It is used by all the social media giants. Maybe you read an article a few years ago from Adrian Chen. He looked into the people whose job this is in the Philippines to basically clear out the worst stuff from Facebook. I have a friend who had to whose job it was partly to monitor a social networking site for child porn. Imagine that's your job. And it is, because we want people, we don't want to look at this stuff, right? We want to have a free access to the world. It's like you go to a hotel and you want your room to be clean. That's part of the joy of being a hotel, right? But like maids at a hotel, we want our maids and garbage collectors of the internet to do this away. We don't want to see it. We don't want to be bothered with it. We don't want to have to think about it. We don't want to have to acknowledge them. And we don't want to have to value them. But we also don't want to do their jobs. And we wonder why inequality exists in a so-called meritocracy. Unlike a visible community moderator, and like most human infrastructures that clean up human mess and keep our organizations running smoothly, this infrastructure is invisible. I realize this example is much bigger than a problem you can tackle alone, but think about how this infrastructure grinds on in the background, grinding humans in it down. Just like Layla said, I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want you to feel like this problem is bigger than you, because this problem is all of us, and we can all design systems. That's literally what we do. That's why this is such a great problem to solve, because we can do it. We have to start somewhere, and a good way is at your own company, in your own job. Do you value the people who keep you running? When you make products, when we think about how those products fit into the world, do we think about how the humans are going to use them? And not just like, the cool things they're going to do, but really, do we understand the pain points all the way back at the beginning of thinking about how a product can be designed so much that we can start to understand, well, gosh, people don't just chat, and they don't just communicate with outside employees or vendors or clients. They also need canonical documents. Those documents have to live. Who's going to do that job? Is it all of us? Do you feel like doing it? I don't want to do it. Do we want someone who can do it? All of that work is very, very straightforward work that you can do and I can do. So let's go back to Carl Weick's paper. It's one of my favorite pictures. I love it. Here's the opening paragraph. Imagine that you're either the referee, coach, player, or spectator at an unconventional soccer match. Football, sorry, but it says soccer. The field for the game is round. There are several goals scattered haphazardly around the circular field. People can enter and leave the game whenever they want to. They can throw balls in whenever they want. They can say, that's my goal, whenever they want to, and as many times as they want to, and for as many goals as they want to. The entire game takes place on a sloped field, and the game is played as if it makes sense. Weick uses this example to highlight educational systems, but when I read it, do you know what it sounds like to me? Life online. Sounds like the internet. Sounds like work sometimes. It sounds like we're all sort of making it up as we go along. But so is everyone else. And we have to operate in that crazy world where it's not just us, and there are no rules, and the rules are not transparent, and it's really overwhelming and frustrating. Life in a world in which we thought digital products and communities and systems would somehow magically mirror physical infrastructures and societies without us having to do the work of figuring out how that happened. One of the more astonishing things to me is how much we celebrate good design, the kind of design that seems effortless and almost invisible. We celebrate both the invisibility of that and the work that went into it because we know how hard it is to accomplish. And what's astonishing to me is that the same is true of human systems. Do you think this conference magically happened? Do you think it was built overnight by elves? Do you think any event or system that runs seamlessly doesn't have a massive team of people behind it ensuring all the bits fit together, the mishaps have a solution? Do you think that because systems feel so loosely coupled that people can just go ahead and do what they want and someone else will clean up the mess? I don't think you think this way. I think you are really smart and good people. We all are. But we just don't think about the people who keep us running. We don't think about the people who clean up after us. And maybe it would be nice if rather than making us just clean up after this, we help them so that they had less to do on the garbage side. Here is the problem, the biggest problem. Designing human systems is very hard and it is not sexy. I mean, I started this whole talk with talking about bureaucracy, which is perhaps the least sexy thing in the entire world, right? Like, none of you are kind of like, oh, bureaucracy, I'm so excited about this talk, it's my favorite, yeah. No. If you try and change human systems, you can frustrate your employees. Like, does anybody here know what holacracy is? Is anyone familiar with Zappos trying to implement holacracy? Is anyone familiar with how well that has been going? Not so great. I got to talk to some employees at Zappos when holacracy was relatively new, and they were like, this is a nightmare. Like, it's actually worse than just a hierarchical system. We don't know what to, it's like confusing, it's kind of demoralizing, sometimes it's humiliating. You do not want the people you work with or for, or who work for you, to feel that way. You want them to feel as good about your work as you feel about yours. And if you don't feel good about your work, you want to find a new job. Or you want to change the organization that you're in. But the big challenge, and I think it's such an exciting challenge, is that if we apply our principles, and some of the principles that I talk about here, thinking about humans, to these systems, we can actually design them in ways that allow us to be better societies, to be better companies, to be more thoughtful, to be more caring of the people around us. I'm asking that we sit down and find ways to build human infrastructure with as much empathy and care as we use in creating apps. Structures, guidelines, tools, it's not like rigid. I'm not saying go out and be a bunch of dictators and tell people they have to use products exactly as you designed them, because that's never worked. Humans use products in all kinds of ways, and it's usually not wrong. That's what's kind of fun. They show us new ways to use things that we never imagined possible. But the problem is that culture takes root whether you're intentional about it or not, and so do communities. If you don't want bad, toxic culture to take root in your companies, in your societies, in your communities, online, you have to be intentional about the way in which you build culture. And I know you can do it, because look at this kind of a thing, right? Look how nice it is to come and to talk to people. We're intentional about how we behave at these places in a way where we really want to think about, how do I want to talk to these people? How do I want to engage? This is a wonderful example of building intentional culture. And it's not something we do as much when we think about our products. The problem is when you have no boundaries or guidelines, no tools or processes or ways to support the people who populate your platforms and use your technology, you have no recourse when destructive cultural elements set up shop. All you have are lines drawn in the sand and a fat tidal wave of it's too late heading to shore. So what I'm asking about is that we sit down and find ways to design our human infrastructure. I'm asking us to really think about this, right? Whoops, is this not working now? There we go. So that shore with that fat tidal wave, it's populated with our users. It's populated with us. I mean, a lot of what has happened in recent years, right? With all the digital tools that we've put so much trust into, we put so much time into. We use our own products. And what has happened, right? We have these moments now where we're just like, what have we done, right? Think about the example that Leah used of all of these technologists in Silicon Valley suddenly being like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You guys can use digital technology, but my kids can't. I mean, how is that designing for all of us to build the culture that we need? It's wrong to think that societies and organizations can just deal with the human part and we'll focus on the technology part. And most of all, it is wrong. I think it is morally wrong to not value people who help us do our jobs and exist in functional organizations and societies. It's wrong to not acknowledge that they create systems that are just as necessary as a front end or a back end or a design language system. It is all intertwined, and it always has been, and we've just chosen to ignore it, much to our great discredit. None of our products are free of bias. They're not free of opinion. So my challenge to you is start having an opinion about how organizations and societies best use our products. Let's all start having that opinion and talking about those opinions, communicating about those opinions. Have an opinion about what is and isn't okay. Support users, not just individuals like me or like you, like not just the individuals in this room, but the teams who support you and in which you're embedded, in developing and growing processes that can be sustained. Otherwise, we're all designing for our downfall. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Ooh, 5 minutes to spare.
Oh, look at you. Perfect. Thank you,
Very perfect.
Leah. So I actually have a question about human infrastructure.
I love a human
So Spotify is often seen as this darling of with the squad model and sort of organizational agile structure, and I'm curious how that works in practice.
So
it's a big question.
it's a big question, and I'm not sure I can answer it fully because I'm not here technically representing Spotify,
Okay.
and I don't want to say, I mean, I would actually love to talk about it because I think that even though it's called squad, it's like a lot of structures in a lot of companies, right? It's just the names are different, but really the function is the same. And sometimes Agile works for you, and sometimes Agile doesn't work for you. I think Agile is a great a great example actually of a system that works really well for certain types of people and certain roles. But that cadence doesn't always work for everyone. Like user researchers, we don't work on an Agile structure, right? And in fact, we need some lead time to be able to we do different types of projects.
Right.
We do foundational, structural. We want to help you understand your problem before you even start design. Please let us help you to understand your problem before you start designing for it.
Yeah.
I beg of you. But we also don't just work on like a 2-week cadence or a 1-week cadence or whatever your Agile cadence is, right? We don't just respond, we don't just build things in that same way. We work in a different way. And I think that Agile, it's a great system for certain things, but it can be really frustrating sometimes because the whole point of Agile is move, produce, right? Release,
Right.
release, release.
Yeah.
And like, what if we want to understand this thing you've released in a more foundational and more functional way? And yet you're just like, but we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
How many user researchers have heard, we don't have time to understand that better because we have to get this out the door?
I was like, yeah.
Is it all the user researchers? Oh, that's like 10 of us, so great. But we can hug later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought, like, related to that, there's a question from the Slido. What are some best practices to end the fragmentation of work and collaboration tools in a company?
So I think part of the problem is I don't have all the best practices because I haven't been able to enact this all the time in my life. Well, actually, that's not true. I think part of the way that you think about ending that fragmentation is you have to be willing to talk to higher level stakeholders. You have to be willing to kind of put yourself out, or even within your team. Like maybe just start small. It's kind of like, think of your individual team and think of the problem you can affect, right? If you said to your team, hey, I feel really frustrated, like my immediate team, I don't know where to find things, we're really bad about uploading things, we need some help in doing this. And then the team in which you're embedded, we can't always share information with you. I think if you start small, it's like, think globally, act locally, but think about it into your teams. How do you operate? Where can you affect change? You can probably affect change. You can talk to your manager. You can talk to, if you are a manager, you can talk to your team. Is the process that we have functional? Do we need help? Do you have project managers and Agile coaches who could help you? Think about that, and then think about like kind of bringing the next team in and the next team. Because it's like, unless you're someone whose literal job it is to make decisions about the tools that people use, you have to start in a stepwise fashion, I think. Because unless you go up to someone, unless you are really ballsy, which some of us are not, and you can go to someone and say, it's really frustrating because we can't find anything. I know people who have tried to do that at companies, and they've just been told, you don't understand our culture. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to sort of try to make those changes and talk about this more within our smaller teams, and then for the ballsy people to speak up. That's a really general answer, but I think that's the place you would have to start.
So speaking of roles, is there a role or a name of a role for someone who designs organizations and infrastructures?
There probably is. There's a name for everything,
yeah,
but I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
Do you know
there are organizational development specialists.
Yeah.
There are people who have whole degrees in that, but I do think that in design, we actually have a kind of design and technology. We actually kind of have more of a unique emergent system. So in the field of design, it's often design ops, kind of in that vein. So if you think of a title, there you go. So the next one I have is the idea of needing better systems is a common theme that's echoed. But what does this mean? What do these impactful systems actually look like day to day?
Wait, are you making me answer for both me and Layla? No, I'm just, because you had your talk was also about systems, impactful, better systems, impactful systems. I think it's like what I just said and what Leila said in her talk, right? And the answering her questions. Impactful systems look like day-to-day. They look like you taking the responsibility and not just expecting someone else to do it, right? And me, all of us, each of us taking responsibility. Impactful systems that happen day-to-day look like each of us thinking, how am I using this? How am I operating in my company? When someone comes to me and says, hey, we really need to understand like what's going on in your team, and are we communicating properly? Do you go, oh, I'm very busy and I don't have time to meet? Or do you stop and say, I would like to help you with this because I know in the long term it will help me? When you're at your company and you're thinking, like I know one of the things that was interesting about Slack is Slack popped up. Like in large companies, all of a sudden there was all of these tiny, tiny little teams that were basically like, we can't communicate, we need a better tool. And then there was like 100, like IBM had this, I know, right? Hundreds of small, tiny teams that were basically isolated little islands, right? Which is not to say you shouldn't, I mean, it's hard because at a big company, you're just like, whatever, we got to take care of ourselves. I understand sometimes that's what happens. But how can you think about, we are doing this, but what about the teams we work with? What about the people around us? How can we make sure that we are not just isolating ourselves and isolating our work? I think that's what it looks like day to day. It looks like being literally being, as a really silly, maybe sounding example, but I leave a tip for house cleaning in hotels. And I always leave a note, and I always say thank you. Housekeeping. It's partly so they know it's them, but also partly so it's not just like for housekeeping, blah. And one time, housekeeping left me a note, and the woman who cleaned my room said thank you with a smile and signed it. And it was this very small human moment, and I was like, I could have left 100 notes and never gotten one back, and that's not why I do it, but getting that one back made me feel like in day-to-day, that's what this looks like. It looks like acknowledging. It looks like thinking about something beside yourself and your own team. It looks like putting yourself out there and really incorporating the whole. And the others who do this work, and valuing them, and making them more visible. I think that's what it looks like in the day-to-day.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Leah. This was wonderful. We have a gift for you.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you.
Well. So thank you very much. Thanks. One more round of applause for Leah.
Thank you. Well,